Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Ab-Soul called Do What Thou Wilt. I feel I should like Ab-Soul a lot more than I do. Okay, that's probably a misleading statement because for the most part I do like this guy. His breakthrough Project Control System was a great album with the sort of creativity and ideas that made for thought-provoking listens and could compensate for wordplay that either slid towards corniness or revealed more flaws than could really be excused. I had a lot of hope on his future projects that he'd be able to refine some of these ideas and sounds into something that was sharper and harder and more cohesive, and then he released These Days. I'll be blunt, I was probably too easy on that album when I reviewed it 2 years ago, trying to search for deeper themes and satirical elements that just did not coalesce, and when the hooks just weren't there to match the production or the slew of guest stars that were really all over the place, I found myself looking for reasons to like that album, and I kept coming up short. And ever since then, I've heard plenty of guest verses from him, from collaborations with The Game, to J.R.U.G.S, to Danny Brown, and while so many have praised this guy, I have been consistently underwhelmed by his wordplay. I don't know what to tell you. He slipped towards corniness more often than I'd really excuse, and he's still not a consistently strong wordsmith in terms of constructing his bars. Hell, that's one of the reasons why I'm not at all surprised that it took so long for my Patreon voters to push this to the top of the schedule. Maybe some of that spark had died out in comparison with his peers in TDE who have been much more consistent or pushed out much more interesting projects. But you know, there was still a part of me that had real hope for Ab-Soul that he could pull this off. Although his list of guest stars was certainly different than I was expecting coming out of this album, I was more surprised than I probably should be that there was no Kendrick verse. He's consistently shown up Ab-Soul every time he's been on one of his albums. But outside of Schoolboy Q, Punch, and SZA, Ab-Soul seemed to be pulling a lot more from outside of TDE for this. I expected Mac Miller, they've worked together plenty of times before, but Rhapsody, Boz from Dreamville, Dash from ASAP Mob, and even Cocaine, an old school veteran who started his career with Eazy-E? So, okay, yeah, I was curious about this. What did we get from Do What Thou Wilt? Well, okay. We haven't gotten something like this in a long time, that's for sure, and something that always amuses me when it does show up, because every once in a while, an artist who is normally taken very seriously decides that he wants to screw with his audience, with critics, and with anyone else who will bother to listen. These albums are rare, but they definitely exist, and with Do What Thou Wilt, Ab-Soul joins that proud tradition of trolling the hell out of anybody who might take him seriously. Now, what this means is that the typical metric to whether or not this album is good or not goes mostly out the window. Well, at least to some extent. There's still art that's being created here with elements like production and bars and wordplay that should be considered. But lyrically, thematically, this is a very different animal. It's gonna take some deeper examination and turn off to see whether this successful troll is being successful. But some of you might be asking why I even came to this conclusion. After all, it sounds like what you would expect from Ab-Soul at first listen, with his too clever by half hedonism, full of weird references cribbed from religion and philosophy texts blended with sex, drugs, and a lot more sex and drugs. And that's not entirely unfamiliar from Ab-Soul, especially given his previous two albums. But these days, it was lodged in a haze of its own making, both in the production and the content. But right out of the gate, Do What Thou Wilt seems a lot more focused. Hell, the very first song might be exactly what you would expect from Ab-Soul, going hard as hell, literally taking shots at Jay Electronica for going at Kendrick, and full of some ridiculously well-crafted bars against this huge gothic swell with bells and seething guitars. Although, like with usual, with Ab-Soul we get a few corny pieces like comparing his choppers, his guns to P.F. Chang's and Benihana, or saying that his fur-lined boots have him feeling cozy. Really? But then Huey Knew Then, following a pretty basic double entendre-laced weed song with a really unnecessary beat shift. Even Ab-Soul, he seems kinda bored with that style, his wonky horns, seedy keys, and interpolation of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air theme, to say nothing of flows that are very reminiscent of early Eminem, which of course he references later in that song. Granted, this is also a place where he says that he's hornier than the brass section of a band, but really, okay, it's outweighed by a solid gritty verse from Dash, which mentions a threat to assassinate Trump and a great hook about blacking out, referencing white lies told behind his back, the pale white horse of death brought upon in the apocalypse, and even white lives matter when I black out. And if you think the naked provocation stops there, his next song, Threatening Nature against these ominous church bells, flips and fuses a load of religious and early American iconography that seems half designed to make some interesting points, sexism propagated by religious and cultural institutions, putting forward the whole God is a woman hypothesis and the irony that would then propagate from that on those institutions, and then half these lines designed to piss people off, like the line, with all disrespect, I think the American flag was designed by, well, insert the homophobic slur there. So, okay, maybe Ab-Soul's trying to make a point about feminism. Well, no, I would not go there either. Because his very next song, Womanogamy, is about him wanting bisexual girls and lesbians to fuck him because he likes all women all over the place, where he can stick his thumb up their butt and finger fuck Mother Earth. And then there's 2 songs later, we have Wifey versus Wi-Fi / P.M.S, where he falls straight into your typical bitching about nagging girlfriends, with the running metaphor of his cell phone being analogous to actual prison cells, and even the point of dyeing the letters M-O-M on the phone as 666. Ugh. Then you got Portishead in the Morning / Her World, 2 songs later where he restates that he's not a sexist no matter how many times he tells her to suck it, and why go to heaven? There's no bitches there. Of course, then he references his own call out from Control System, 1 time for the women, 2 times for the ladies, 3 times for the bitches. Now this will come back again on Now You Know, which is such a tangled knot. Okay, first he jacks Elzai's miswrite premise from earlier this year and implies that the miss in all these cases implied negativity in popular conscience, even as he's trying to state all the misconceptions society has given him surrounding women, and because of all those apologies that he's making that he's been misrepresented, the feminist should be on his dick. You see what I mean about trolling his audience? The consistent contradictions, the blatant lies, the increasingly tangled web of it all. To some level, it would make sense coming from Ab-Soul, who either went through drugs, a warped sense of grief coming after the death of his girlfriend, or sheer manic impulse, but the overall message seems more that he's just messing with you. Frankly, I don't think that Ab-Soul's much of a misogynist at all. Even with his embrace of the Little Rascals oath of the He-Man Woman Haters Club, he's just baiting easy controversies, trolling you, which if you go to Beat the Case Straight Crooked, he outright references his own deceptive nature in the name of liability through yet another canny Eminem reference. And those strings of Eminem and Slim Shady references actually does raise the point where his trolling might start to hit satire, not just in the constant undermining of institutions through a certain mischievous brand of inarticulate feminism, but also because while Slim Shady was holding the same sort of warped mirror to his primarily white audience, Ab-Soul's doing it to hip-hop's primarily male audience. And yet, even with that, on the last song, Ab-Soul says that he's a liar, a cheater, a devil in disguise, and a deceiver, and yet even he could be lying about all of that too. Even the title of this record is a masterstroke of deception. All formal language that was cribbed from proto-Satanist Aleister Crowley and essentially is a message to defy institutions and do what you want. Of course, that line was pulled from the statement about the law, asserting that love is the only law. And thus for Ab-Soul, it becomes clear that any underlying theme on this record isn't rooted in religion or feminism or hedonism or nihilism. It's really more progressive anarchism, and that's definitely something I can get behind. Folks, all these contradictions, you have to keep in mind, he's probably just fucking with you. Of course, if Ab-Soul was looking to make more of a point, I'm not sure the construction of this record is the way to do it, which is one of the other reasons that I'm thinking about that, because Do What You Wilt is really all over the place. It's not helped by most of the guest performances, because outside of assorted choppy samples, Rhapsody's down-tempo verse in the law, and maybe Mac Miller's chorus contributions, it's certainly better than his tribute to women on the Divine Feminine, what Ab-Soul's doing here, but it doesn't seem like many of his guest stars are entirely on the same page with Ab-Soul, or are well utilized. The verses from Boz, Punch, and Schoolboy Q, they're not bad, but they don't add a lot and they don't seem to fit in all that well. Then you have Cocaine, who doesn't even get a guest verse. But BR3 gets one, structured as a freestyle near the end of Wifey vs. Wi-Fi P.M.S. None of this helps the feeling that this record is a very much a meandering endeavor with a lot of ideas, but its fair share of dud punchlines. The awkward Jewish pun on invocation fabrication, the beat it like a runaway slave line on Beat the Case Straight Crooked, and how often it feels like Ab-Soul has to explain his own punchlines. I could easily go on with this. But then you got songs that just don't build up too much, especially on the second half of this album. I've always said that Ab-Soul projects run longer than they should, and even though this is shorter than these days and arguably better, the back half of this album, especially when songs get increasingly disjointed like God's a Girl and Evil Genius and The Law, it can kind of start to drag. And it runs into the detriment of the punchier insight that Ab-Soul does bring to the table, or worse still, it makes it appear like less like Ab-Soul is pulling a fast one in his audience with the Contradictions, and more just drug-addled, inarticulate rambling. And the hooks don't quite coalesce there either. I dig the melancholic piano against the deeper rumble of the beat on Drugs, SZA's richer backing vocals on Lonely Soul to La Prelude with the bluesy guitar chop the ribbons against the bass, and the buzzy film of YMF with the twinkling melodic flourishes against, yeah, more basic flow, but I still got into it. But it doesn't really have the same gothic swell and punch as earlier songs did on this album. I like when this record goes a little harder. But you know what, at the end of the day, I do like this, but I'm reminded of the kid who was so smart that he never needed to try in school and just got bored and spent his education underperforming and screwing with everyone around him, including the teachers. And yeah, there is an art to this sort of trolling, but it's typically when it makes a clear satirical point, or is so bizarre that it really can't be contextualized. And I don't think Ab-Soul was willing to push that hard in that direction, either through the production or through a lot of his wordplay. As such, there's kind of a ceiling on how much I can recommend this, or how good it can be, especially considering the moments that really did test my patience. But at the end of the day, the tastelessness was tempered with real wit, and there were some subtly transgressive moments I really liked that. I think that hip-hop could use some more of that mischievous provocation in this Slim Shady mold to come back. As such, for me, it's a 7 out of 10 and a recommendation, but a very seriously qualified one. Because you're expecting this to have a lot of cohesion or make a lot of sense outside of Ab-Soul just screwing with you, you're gonna end up disappointed. As it is, I think there are seeds of potential if Ab-Soul wants to take this sort of warped thinking into the structure and meat that held Control System together, but he just needs to take that step. In other words, good, but not great, but still worth a listen. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here, so what did you guys think of this album? Do you think it came together for you, or just kind of fell off into inarticulate rambling? I think there's merit to both arguments, but again, I think Ab-Soul's trolling us regardless of what you guys think. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in more suggestions of what albums I should review coming up, my link to my Patreon is right over here. 3 times a week, you guys get to vote on what comes up on my schedule, and once a week on Saturdays, the higher Patreon members get to add records to my schedule. Coming up on the end of the year, though, so odds are any sort of additions should wait until maybe 2017. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.